Rod Rosenstein out defending his boss, Attorney General Bill Barr, and, interestingly, previewing parts of the Mueller report, which, as we just discussed, is expected next week. We have that story later tonight, and a breakdown of Donald Trump's education chief, Betsy DeVos, under fire now for using kids as props while still trying to slash $200 million worth of programs for literacy. But we begin with Trump's power grab and a sign that he knows some of his own orders are illegal. First, there are new reports Trump wanted to politicize border policy with an idea to try to bus undocumented immigrants into what are called sanctuary cities and are typically more politically liberal. Officials in Trump's own administration saying this idea was, quote, so illegal, and thus it was ultimately dropped. But Donald Trump was out threatening his opponents with this very policy today.
We'll bring them to sanctuary city areas and let that particular area take care of it. California certainly is always saying, oh, we want more people, and they want more people in their sanctuary cities. Well, we'll give them more people. We can give them a lot. We can give them an unlimited supply. And let's see if they're so happy. They say we have open arms. They're always saying they have open arms. Let's see if they have open arms.
This move to pressure immigration authorities into releasing migrant detainees into the sanctuary cities is, as the president just explained there, seen as a quite blatant and potentially unlawful way to use the notion of distributing migrants or border policy to punish your political opponents. Now, that doesn't mean everyone agrees that it's punishment, but it was clearly targeted that way, including its Speaker Pelosi. A DHS official concedes this illicit purpose, saying it was to, quote, send a message to Democrats. It's obviously only the latest instance of this president clashing with the law and his constitutional obligations. Because in a similar vein, Donald Trump telling the person who is expected to become the acting DHS secretary, as he's been cleaning house, that he needs to close the border and that he would pardon him if he were ever jailed for violating these laws and rules. As we've said before, and is important to keep in mind, pardons are for criminals. So that's quite a thing to say to someone who hasn't even officially taken up the post yet. All of this comes, of course, in a wider context that you probably know about, that we have kept an eye on here on this show in our reporting. Donald Trump's own Attorney General under fire for his testimony under oath before Congress. He was proclaiming to lawmakers that, first of all, he didn't think that there was an obstruction case to be found from the Mueller report before it was even released, and saying then, in very provocative language, that when he referred to the lawful surveillance and oversight that occurred in 2016, well, the Attorney General is now, in a Trump tweet style, calling it, quote, spying. He didn't release any evidence for that. Bloomberg is saying that Barr has basically become Trump's Roy Cohn, criticizing him for not standing up to Trump, from shielding from the rule of law, and, in their view, basically falling down on his obligations as Attorney General. This bloodbath at the Department of Homeland Security is a very real issue. And on Monday, Donald Trump was purging the agency's senior management. That's how this week started. So there are reactions to the whole range of elements of this power grab. Some call it an abuse of power, with Donald Trump trying to weaponize the federal government for what he calls political purposes. So this is the type of thing that in the Nixon era we often heard about behind closed doors, and it would leak later. In the current era, a lot of this comes out loud and from the top.
This was an attempted coup. This was an attempted takedown of a president. We have bad laws, and so we're fighting the bad laws. We have the worst laws of any country anywhere in the world.
We know what one co-equal branch of Congress thinks about all this, at least on the Democratic side, and, to be clear, some Republican pushback recently. But what about the judges? They generally have to wait and rule on individual cases, and that's a strong tradition for a strong reason. But judges can also speak in broad terms about what they're seeing, about their own constitutional role, and I want to show you something if you haven't seen it. This was a speech out yesterday where a judge was accepting a pretty prestigious award, the second African-American ever appointed as a federal judge in Mississippi, going on to compare Donald Trump's criticism of the courts to what we've seen historically with the KKK and segregationists.
Now we are eyewitnesses to the third great assault on our judiciary. When politicians attack the courts, it's dangerous, political. You can hear the Klan's lawyers assailing officers of the court across the South. And when the executive branch calls our courts and their work stupid, horrible, ridiculous, when federal judge was called very biased and unfair because he is of Mexican heritage. How did I know if I was in 1967 or 2017? We must do more to defend our bench.
I'm joined now by Matt Miller, who served under the Obama administration at the Justice Department, Victoria DeFrancesco from the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas, and Christina Greer, political science professor at Fordham University. Christina, I wonder what you think of a federal judge speaking carefully. You'll notice it was not a political style disagreement with the president, but an observation that I want to quote carefully. Quote, "I did not know if it was 1967 or 2017. We must do more to defend our bench."
Right. So I've always said, you know, the one thing that keeps me up at night is the U.S. Census. I've added another thing that keeps me up at night, and it's the courts. So we know that in the Constitution, the three branches of government should be equilateral branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. What is worrisome to myself, some judges, and a lot of American citizens is that the politicization, right, from the president and his administration onto the courts at all levels is really dangerous, and it'll have really long-standing effects. The rate at which he's appointing judges who have very right-leaning, some might say nationalist or supremacist leanings, and have been very open and articulate about how they feel about the way the future of the nation should go in a very specific 1967-esque vein, is very worrisome to not just people like me, but to judges who care about upholding the Constitution on the bench. And I think that's what we were hearing, because this is their occupation, and they recognize that, you know, depending on what level they're in, so many cases get bumped up to them based on how justices rule on whatever it is, civil or criminal cases. But when we have Trump and his administration essentially stacking the courts with hyper-conservative justices who worship the president and not the U.S. Constitution, I think that is the most dangerous and long-standing. If we can survive a Trump presidency and our democracy can still stand, I think the long-standing effects of the judiciary branch based on decisions and behavior of the executive branch will weaken our democracy for, unfortunately, I'm afraid, decades to come.
Victoria, how do you view that concern in the context of the hollowing out and the pressure on DHS this week?
So what we're seeing is the president running roughshod on a whole host of institutions. So he's not getting his way in Congress. Senate is still helping him out a little bit, especially with the majority leader allowing him to get judges confirmed in a quicker time period. But then what we're seeing is he's trying to stack the courts. And now when it comes to the bureaucracy and the rules and the mundane procedures that have been placed in our bureaucratic institutions, he's saying, I don't like that you're not doing what I want you to do, so I'm just going to fire you. So we saw that.
For your analysis, you have Nielsen, Grady, Vitiello, you have the Secret Service, and you have these reports about, oh, if you say I can't carry out an unlawful order, that's pretty central. The president dangling a pardon. I've never heard of anything like that.
You know, so it's every institution. He keeps getting blocked at different places, so he's just going to go down the line until he gets what he wants. And now he's saying he's basically going to do, you know, whatever he wants, no matter what the DHS legal department said. And you know what? He's going to take migrants and ship them across the country because that's what he wants, or rather, that's what Stephen Miller wants. So for me, it's a system-wide concern. You know, underscoring my fellow political scientists' concern about the judiciary, it's a wider concern. If he can't have his way with an institution, he's gonna find a way to circumvent it.
Matt?
I think we're at a very dangerous time right now in the Trump presidency, maybe more dangerous than we've seen in the last 2 years. And I think there are two things combined together really to put us there. One is the surge in immigration at the border, I think, is undermining the very rationale for Trump's presidency, the thing he ran on, which is that he told his base he would stop immigration, and he hasn't been able to do it. And I think you combine that with the end of the Mueller investigation, and at least so far, Trump thinking that he's been able to do all of the things he did to interfere with the Justice Department, to fire the FBI director, and get away away with it, at least so far, with no consequences. We'll see if that stands, but I think he feels a little bit unleashed. So at the same time, he's backed into a corner on his most important policy issue. He feels unleashed legally, and like he can get away, like he is unconstrained. And so you have a president really probing the outer limits of the system, seeing just how much he can get away with, and doing it at a time where he really does feel like he can act free of consequences. And I think the two of those together put us in a very, very dangerous moment for the country.
That's very important what you're saying, building on what the other experts here with us have said, Matt, and to go further, at a nonpartisan level, which can be difficult given how political the president is. I just showed his plan to go after Democrats with border policy. But at a nonpartisan level, I think what each of you are alluding to is the fact that America has always required, even in very divided times, the notion that the law is a buffer. And so even very partisan presidents have been told by their own aides, yes, I agree, we're partisan buddies. We want to do these things, but obviously, sir, the law won't let us do that. Let's go back to the drawing board. The lack of experience of this president, combined with his choice, as you just put it, to do this stuff, really changes whether that buffer works at all. Take a listen to former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, literally a right-wing oil executive. I mean, not disagreeing on substance, but on that type of exchange, Matt.
When the president would say, well, here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. And I'd have to say to him, well, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law. It violates a treaty. You know, he got really frustrated.
Matt.
Yeah, look, so I think what he's doing with DHS right now reminds me a lot of what he did with DOJ the first 4 months of the administration before Mueller was appointed, where he was constantly putting pressure on the FBI, putting pressure on Jeff Sessions privately. That then blew up in his face when he got the Mueller investigation. That stopped him somewhat. He continued to attack them publicly, but a lot of his private pressure stopped. At DHS now, you've had him pushing for the last few months for the DHS to do not just inappropriate things, but illegal things. And when the DHS director, who was willing to do a lot for Donald Trump, when Kirstjen Nielsen said, the one thing I can't do is break the law, he fired her. And now you have him telling the new acting DHS director, it's okay if you break the law. I want you to break the law, and if you do it, and if you go to jail, I'll pardon you. So even this constraint where you have officials that say the one thing I can't do is break the law, he's trying to find a way around that. And it is kind of the most lawless thing you can imagine for a president. And I do feel like if there aren't any consequences for it, he's just going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and see how much he can get away with.
And Victoria, how do you put that in the context of the way that this is somewhat consistent? There are criticisms of Donald Trump about being sloppy, about being undisciplined, about making it up. And yet what we're talking about here, particularly on the issue of immigration, goes all the way back to Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who got the very first pardon.
Right. So I think that a very key piece here is the bully pulpit that he uses. So he's breaking all these rules. He's flaunting tradition and rules and whatnot. But what he's doing is he keeps up that Twitter feed and he keeps throwing red meat to that base. So he has this core base of folks who actually like what he's doing. Because remember, he came to drain the swamp, and he's connecting the swamp with our existing institutions. So while he is doing all of this, he's also using it as rhetoric to bolster him going into re-election. So I think another area that we can't dismiss is the public at large, that 35 to 39% that is going to be with him no matter what. And they like his boldness. They like that he's authentic. They like that he shoots from the hip, and he's leveraging that even to the detriment of our democracy.
Right.
Quite
He may shoot from the hip, Christina. I guess the question is who is he shooting at, and is it illegal? Take a listen to an exchange here with Senator Cory Booker on all of this pardon news.
Donald Trump, the president, also told the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, whose name is Kevin McAleenan, that if he were sent to jail as a result of blocking those migrants in contravention to U.S. law, that he would pardon him. Your reaction to that, both as an attorney and as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and just as an American?
I mean, first of all, that should shake every American, that you basically have a president telling people to break the law and that he will pardon you. It goes, and again, we're sitting in Newark where kids are going to prison for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing, and nobody's pardoning them.
So I agree with my fellow political scientists fundamentally. I think what's so dangerous is that the base and members of this administration and far too many members of the Republican Party are fine with letting Donald Trump say, I'm going to break the law and we'll see what we do with it. We know that he's been a failure in the sense that the main promise he gave to his base was that he was going to build a wall. Anyone who's ever looked at a map knows that that's geographically impossible. And so now the new solution is I'll just go into one of the 500 sanctuary cities and drop off these quote unquote illegals into, say, Democrat strongholds. So in this local state partnership. Unfortunately, there are far too many Americans who look at these families at the border and they don't see human beings. This is a consistent message that the president is giving his base, and when he talks on Twitter and talks on television, calling people animals, calling them undeserving, saying that the doors are closed, even though he is the child of an immigrant, even though 2 of his 3 wives are immigrants, even though 4 of his 5 children are children of an immigrant. He does not see the people at the border as sort of the same lineage of his family. And when you interviewed so many Republicans, when you ask them about those families at the border, and they say, if they don't want to get their children taken from them, then they shouldn't have come. So there's a desensitization and there's a lack of humanity that, unfortunately, this president is making normal,
right,
which is really unacceptable, dangerous, and antithetical to what American democracy is all about.
Right, and the statement that you just said by way of quoting, and we've heard it here, is not family values. There are all sorts of things people do wrong, and you can note that they're wrong. The United States has never used child abuse even in our own relatively sometimes draconian system as the punishment. And so the notion that you're going to go ahead and say, lawfully, as sanctioned policy.
Yeah, well, I will say this, just as a footnote, right? We have a long history of separating children from their families. Native American genocides, 400 years of U.S. chattel slavery. And so this is unfortunately a long pattern of what American presidents have done to people of color, but we have not done that in the 21st century.
Right,
We've
as
not
a part
done
of
that
the
in
court system
20th
in the
century.
recent era.
Exactly, and so one would hope and pray that we've evolved as a nation. We know that we have a very dark past in this nation, and so if we listen to our better angels and we try and uphold the values of the founding fathers and what they actually wrote down on paper and sort of make the brochure the reality of our existence, then one would hope that Donald Trump would see that. But he doesn't, and he does not understand his role as the leader and the executive of this nation.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.